Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have an exciting show for you tonight. I'm a fan of the person we have on, Fraser Cain, from the publisher of Universe Today, and also a podcast that I started listening to when it very first started, and on and off many times over. I think it's been 13 years or something like that. They're already up to episode 500, and that's called Astronomy Cast, and I love the show. And so, anyway, I was really happy that Fraser Fraser is not someone that is really down with UFOs. We will discuss it and we'll get his opinion. And I promise you it won't be violent or anything. We may have a couple of semi-soft debates about the topic, and we'll see where it goes from there. And then we're going to be talking a lot of space and all that stuff later on in the show. After the first hour, we will take calls. Anyone would like to call in and ask questions, and the host some questions or whatever. We will go from there. So I want to thank everyone that supports the show. Anyone can do that. You can find that info on podcastufo.com. And generally, we are live on KGRA Radio. And so, first of all, the producer, Race Hobbs, is stuck somewhere in a canyon. I think he was actually in a tunnel. People were trying to turn around. It was a big mess. And so his fill-in guy sent me his radar picture. There's tornadoes all in his area. So they're just popping on a replay over there. So I apologize for you regular. I don't even know how to get to you people over at KGRA Radio. Hopefully they'll wander over to the YouTube channel or my website and see the show. Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing just great. Doing great. It's raining and pouring. It's raining and pouring. I guess the same thing, but it's cold, chilly. We're getting the winter chill already here in first of October.
It's raining here, and it's cold for Arizona. It's probably still in the 70s or 80s, but for Arizona, that's very cold.
Yeah, I know. And well, you need the rain, right?
Yeah, we've got it. Yeah, so we've got a lot of rain going on, but we do need it.
Yeah, so that's good. I hear the whole Southwest is going to get quite a deluge out there. And so what's going on in the UFO, etc. world?
Yeah, so I've got 3 stories I would like to cover, 2 UFOs, and in celebration of your guest today, or just because I love space, I've got a space one too, my own space story. So, to begin, I'm not sure if this is even a news story, but it's something someone posted in the Open Minds UFO news group. And this is from casino.org, and they actually have a UFO site. It's pretty cool, where they've got a lot of information, some stats and everything regarding UFOs. And of course, up top, what do they have? They've got the odds of seeing a UFO. So according to Las Vegas, essentially, it looks like, if I'm reading this, it's a plus 124,700, which I think means 1,247 to 1 odds that you'll see a UFO. List.
That's not that bad.
Yeah. And well, that's just Alabama, it looks like. So they've got everything for every different state. Let's see. We'll just look up a couple. In Maine, it's a lot better. It's 370 to 1.
That's because it's only 370 people in Maine, I think.
Yeah. And then let's check Arizona. Oh, wow, the odds are really, I think their numbers are way off according to, I'm sure they didn't use like population and stuff like that. But Arizona, they have it at something like nearly 2,000 to 1 odds. So very high, which is kind of weird. But there's a lot more information about history of UFO sightings, including a timeline that's interactive where you can click and look at different sightings. It also has a few facts, and here they are. These are interesting. You're most likely to see a UFO in Wyoming, according to them. Wow. Florida is the state with the lowest odds of seeing a UFO, which is according to them, which is completely different than any statistics I've ever seen. So I don't know where they're getting their numbers.
Gulf
and then
breeze,
it says,
Yep,
over 40,000 Americans have taken out alien abduction insurance.
Boy, I didn't see that coming. Boy,
how weird is that?
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of
starting a company.
Facts I'm not sure where they get their numbers. I would argue their numbers, but it is pretty interesting.
Can you, before you go on there, so if you do happen to get abducted, how do you collect your, you know,
I don't know. I've heard of this before, actually, this alien abduction insurance, because you can get insurance pretty much for everything.
Lloyd's
And
of London? Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And I think this is a Lloyd's product as well. So you'd have to look that up if you're looking to get alien abduction insurance. Although, I'm sure, as we know, especially that many of those 40,000, probably the majority, probably really genuinely believe that, they may be abducted or have been before. So who
Wow.
knows?
Yeah, I would really love to see that policy. That would be
Yeah,
really
really
interesting.
interesting. But the interface and the graphics, you could tell that they spent a lot of time on this site, and it's really, really cool. In fact, there's a little map, and when you click on your country or where you are, your state, I mean, this little UFO flies above it and beams this little light down. So the graphics are really cool. It's a really cool site.
Huh. Interesting. I'll have to
Something
check
to
that
check
out.
out.
Yeah.
So, a couple other pieces of news. So, you and I talked at length about this on my podcast, but To the Stars Academy has come out with an article recently about some alleged anomalous materials that they are examining. I complained a lot about how they wrote this article and how it came about, but the point is, what's interesting, of course, is they have this project where they're taking what people are claiming to be mysterious material, and they're actually looking into it. It appears that the material they're looking into right now are what are known as Art's parts. So it's something Art Bell got. And we're deducing this because the article said it had similar elements, magnesium, zinc, bismuth, that were claimed in small layers, just like were claimed that were to be part of these Art's parts. And the story, and here was my big complaint, the article referred to this material and that it has been out there for decades. If it is Art's parts, which I'm sure it is, they really, I feel, should have done a whole history of the material, how it was anonymously sent to Art Bell. So we have a full story of what the heck this stuff is. I hope that it was just an oversight, because it's kind of deceptive not to give history, even if it hurts the credibility. I mean, because that history is going to come out regardless. So
That's right.
we should know either way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another development. So researchers have found, and I'm not sure who found this in the beginning. I think it might have been this website, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Scientific Research. It's a blog on Blogspot. But they looked into the SEC files. This is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And they actually found some paperwork, an update on To the Stars Academy. And if we read this right, some of the things that it says here is that Dr. Gary Nolan resigned in
Oh,
late
really?
August. Yeah, we were
Wow.
talking about him. He's the one
Mm-hmm.
who analyzed these alleged, alien bodies out of Peru, which of course all turned out to be human, which we knew before,
Yeah.
even though people like Dr. Stephen Greer claim otherwise. But Dr. Greer is the one who hired this guy to look into it, or at least partnered with him, and then was unfortunately did not like his results because it looks alien, but it's not. But the most shocking thing in here is that it looks like, let me find the number, but it's huge. It looks like they are in debt to the tune of nearly $40 million.
How could that be even
I don't
possible?
know. Let me read this to you. So this is page 13, note 2, and the title is Growing Concern. It says the accompanying financial statements have been prepared on a growing concern basic, which contemplates the realization of assets and blah, 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 blah. Let me get to the last sentence. The company has incurred losses from operations and has an accumulated deficit at June 30th, 2018 of $37,432,000. These factors raise doubt about the company's ability to continue as a growing concern.
I can't even
How's
imagine what
Yeah, this is really weird. Now, there were some other documents that came out, and one of the other documents that is in here uh, talks about their material studies program, essentially the Atom Project. And it also talks about another partnership they have, uh, research that they've got going on with Earth Tech International, regarding Beamed Energy Launch Systems Program, a planning project, BELS. And I think you could ask your guest, this would probably be a interesting topic for Fraser, about this, because this is essentially the same technology that they want to use for that Yuri uh, Gelner, I forget his last name, but
Yuri
this,
Geller?
yeah, no,
Yeah.
the Russian
Oh, oh,
billionaire who
oh, I know
started
who you
this
mean.
project.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know
And
his name right off, but I know who you mean. Yeah.
yeah, so he wanted to send all of these little micro spaceships using a
Right.
laser that pushes them, the solar technology. Essentially, it's like a light technology where these lasers push these objects along. So that may be it. Now, of course, many of the members of To the Stars are also previous members, or at least worked with Bigelow Aerospace. Bigelow Aerospace has some huge contracts, especially with Boeing, they've partnered up with. They're working with NASA. So it could be that there is a very high dollar project that they're being farmed out to help with Bigelow. That could explain this because, of course, the dollars they're dealing with are huge when it comes to some of these aerospace projects. So there could be an answer that doesn't mean that it is what it looks like, which is that they're $37 million in debt and they're screwed. How could they have spent that much money? It could be part of some work they're doing where they are planning to recover that. It could be work with, I would imagine that would be through Bigelow because he's got, of course, his ties into the space industry.
Right. That's Yuri Milner is the person you were thinking of.
Milner.
Yeah.
I knew it was close.
Yeah.
So yeah, so speaking of Bigelow, but more along space, is this new space race. So, of course, I've talked a lot about the space race to the moon and some of the other motivations going on than just science. Of course, there's a lot of politics and global politics going on there. But there are also politics going on in another really important race, which is to get the United States back in the game of getting humans to the International Space Station. So, getting humans into space. And there's actually two spacecraft that have been given the green light who are already scheduled to take humans, and that is the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft and then the Boeing Starliner. So I've got an article in Den of Geek all about these. What I kind of did was a head-to-head. What are the similarities and the differences between these two? And there are some really interesting things about each. The SpaceX Dragon, if you see the interior, looks a lot like a Tesla car. It's very fancy, minimalistic, super futuristic with these panels, that display panels that you can fold away, and they're touchscreen and everything. So it's pretty cool. What's unique? A couple of things that are unique about the Dragon spacecraft. One is that it has a trunk, just like a car. So it has a section that holds the solar panels, that also can hold a bunch more cargo. So that's going to be really important. This is unpressurized cargo, so humans can't fit in there, but a lot of other cargo can, which is really important. Now, the cargo in the trunk is going for a one-way trip because this trunk actually burns up in the atmosphere when they come back in. But anything else they can stuff in the capsule if there aren't any humans for bringing back more material. But that's been one benefit that the Dragon capsule has had. It's already been going to the ISS, the uncrewed version, and it's able to bring materials back as well. Now, the Dragon capsule, here's one big difference. It is going to use more of a traditional parachute, just like the Apollo program. It will fall into the ocean, slowed down by a parachute. One of the things they're working on, they were hoping to have, is more of a kind of futuristic where this thing can land just like their Falcon rockets do, where they have a retro engines that will slow the craft down so it can land on land, but that isn't ready. So at least at the beginning, they're going to have these parachutes that are going to be slowing it down. Getting to the Starliner, one of the cool things about the Starliner on that front is that the Starliner is actually going to land on the ground. It's got these giant balloons that blow up and then allow it. It's slowed down by a parachute, but these balloons allow it to land on the balloons soft enough where they can make ground landings. So that's going to be very important. It's going to be much easier to retrieve, and I think it'd be really scary. It's one of the scariest parts, I think, in all the space movies when they come back and they've got to land in the ocean, and it's scary. What if something happens? And of course there was an incident where it's debated exactly what happened. I think now it's not so much, but one of the astronauts I guess freaked out and pulled the port door open essentially, and almost drowned when
Wow.
I forget the details. I'm sure Fraser would have that, tasking him with all of this stuff. But yeah, that's one cool thing about the Starliner. The Starliner, this is really interesting too. So the space tourism is something new that's starting up. The big news SpaceX made in the last few weeks is
Yeah.
that they're going to fly this Japanese millionaire around the moon. Well, the
Billionaire. Yeah.
Starliner says they're going to be doing that too. They're going to be working with a company called Space Adventures, and Space Adventures was renting seats from the Russians to fly people to the ISS. They did this a few times in the 90s, early 2000s, but they stopped because essentially the U.S. was renting all those seats, those extra seats. Well, now what the Starliner says, Boeing says, is they're going to actually rent extra seats to potential space tourists. So they might be doing that. They're going to be working with Space Adventures. So they may be flying, if they're flying humans up as soon as next year, they may be doing this in the next year or two, renting out seats for people to be able to fly up to the ISS, just like the Russians were doing. So that's some interesting stuff here. You could look into it more. The one thing that makes this very pressing is that our contract with Russia to take us to the ISS, the U.S. astronauts, is expiring in April 2019, which happens to be the same month that SpaceX will be taking their first crew to the ISS. But we actually have, I guess, rented seats up until November of next year with the Russians. But after that, we've got to figure out what we're going to do to get people up there. So hopefully there will be no more delays. Boeing was the front runner for a long time. Of course, they actually have built all of the spacecraft that have taken humans into space for NASA. But surprisingly, they just had some issues, and SpaceX came from behind, and SpaceX is right now ahead of the race. They most likely will be the first to, be a commercial private organization to take astronauts to the ISS.
Right.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it is. Wow, interesting. So I think it's really amazing that there's actually going to be passengers, flying, and I wonder, what the tickets cost. It's amazing. I wonder if they're going to double book too.
Well, they're
Charge for
huge. In fact,
baggage.
we've got another article, a supplemental, an article coming out that I did on space tourism, and it's part of the magazine we put together for Den of Geek for the New York Comic-Con, which is going on something like the end of this week. I think it starts. And so that will be out soon. But I've got pricing for all of the different options out there. But we don't know how much the Japanese gentleman is going to be paying to go around the moon. But these travelers with Space Adventures are paying hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I mean,
Wow.
it ain't cheap.
Yeah, yeah, rightly so. I mean, it costs so much per pound just to get out of orbit. Thanks so much. All
My
right.
pleasure.
All right, and I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Have a great show. Talk to you later.
All right, thanks. All right, so our guest, Fraser Cain, I contacted him, I believe, quite a while ago. I was so glad when he finally said that he would actually come on the show. First off, I remember contacting him. He said something along the lines of, no, I don't want to talk about UFOs, but I'm going to talk about them for a little while. Fraser Cain, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Love your podcast, as you probably know, after I've been talking about it. And you co-host with Dr. Pamela Gay, and she is such a delight, entertaining, and so much fun. And the thing that I like the best about your show is that you both really explain in terms that someone like myself and anyone is just getting into it can actually understand.
Yeah, that's really the wonderful thing about Astronomy Cast is Pamela knows the material so deeply that we don't have to prepare. Right? There's
So
no
you
script.
just have a topic and you just go
We
into
just
it.
have a topic, and we're
Amazing.
just following my curiosity. I'm the 4-year-old. Like, what about black holes? And and I just ask my questions, and she patiently answers all of my questions. So,
It works really well.
it's been wonderful and an absolute honor to work with her over these 12 years.
Has it
As
been?
you
I
said,
thought it was.
we just wrapped up episode 500
Right.
of the podcast, and we're still going strong. So
It's amazing. And now I somehow found out about your podcast and actually listened to the very first one when it came out. I think I wrote that in the email to you. I was living in California at the time, and it was my son who contacted me. He said, "Hey, check out this new podcast is coming out." And so I think it was maybe either the first or second episode, but I do remember I did listen to the first episode. So, and you pretty much stayed very consistent. I know you changed a little bit. You were doing Google Hangouts with a whole bunch of people at one time. I remember that transition. And then now it's back to just you and Pamela again. It's really good show.
well, we switched to doing. We used to do the shows like we would record the episode over Skype, kind of like what you're doing, but we would it was just a utility for us to be able to record the show. And then when it was done, we would process the audio and release it as a podcast. And then at some point, I think in like 2011, 2012, I had the bright idea that we should switch to doing the show as a live show to bring in the live audience aspect of it. And that set us on a whole new path, and we still do it. So every episode we do is a live episode. Half an hour of it is the two of us hanging out and doing the actual episode, and the other half hour is us just answering questions and interacting with the audience. And there is nothing like doing a live show for helping you, focusing your brain, helping you understand what you don't know, because you're on the spot all the time. And so I highly recommend it for anybody who wants to create some kind of content and wants to take their, I guess, what they do to the next level. Turn it into a live show and answer people's questions, and you will be amazed at how quickly all of the puzzle pieces fit into your brain. But I think what you're probably talking about is the weekly Space Hangouts. So that's a separate show, which is very similar to your news part, where different space journalists join me and we talk about the big events of the week. And so there's sort of two shows. We do so many shows now; it's kind of hard to keep track of them all.
Yes, and you have your own YouTube channel, which is very, very active. And by the way, really nice production on your videos on that too.
Thank you so much.
You do a lot of work on that.
No, and it's funny. If you go right back to the beginning, you can see our first experiments. They were a couple of minutes long, and it was me sort of slouching in a forest, and we showed a couple of pictures, and now the new ones are 15, sometimes 20 minutes long, very 4K video. Almost the entire thing has just really beautiful background graphics that we're using. So it's been this learning it only took us 360 episodes to to learn all the little lessons that we wanted to get to where we are now, and we're only really still a tiny piece along the journey as we learn to make better space content.
Yes. Well, by the way, I do agree with you about the live show aspect. I've been doing, I don't know, maybe 3 years or something like that, live, maybe longer, live shows, and it's horrifying. But at the same time, you're right, it keeps you sharp, and I won't go back to a recorded show now unless I have to for some reason.
Yeah, there's something nice to be able to just like record the show. It's done.
No editing.
You don't have to edit it. It's just finished. You did it.
Right.
Move on.
Right. So I in our conversation ahead of the show, I mentioned to you that I wanted to discuss UFOs for a little bit of the show, and then I have a whole bunch of space stuff I'd like to talk about.
Sure. However you want to balance it out, I'm cool with either topic.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a fan of. I wouldn't even call myself an amateur astronomer or anything like that. I'm just a fan of astronomy. That's the best way I'd put it. And I'm also, I'm not a ufologist, so to speak. I'm someone that talks to people about UFOs and gets their ideas, and that's why I have all kinds of people on the show. I did my first UFO debate when I was only 20 episodes in with Dr. Seth Shostak at SETI, and he really crushed me. That was and I'm not saying that I'm good at debating, and I'm not really looking for a debate, but in our email exchange, I sensed that you did not think that there was anything to the UFO topic. So I guess I'll ask you, do you think there's anything to UFOs?
No, and we can kind of go into it for sure, and I can sort of explain my perspective on it. But do I think that the Earth is being regularly visited by aliens from another world? No, I don't think so.
Is that
or and to sort of more specifically say it is that I am unconvinced of any of the evidence that says that we are. That's all. So
all right. Well,
there is nothing that.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. What about people that are have real credible people that have had really credible sightings that are unexplainable, and sometimes mass sightings? I mean, I could go into a number of sightings, and
sure.
we're not saying that I'm not also jumping on the alien bandwagon, because I don't care how long anyone's been doing what I'm doing. As far as I know, no one really knows what's going on, but they know something's going on, and that's the questions I'd like to ask you. What do you think? Is there something to the sightings, that the 30,000 sightings a year or whatever it is, with a small portion of them unexplainable? Do you think there's something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to just go back to the term, right? Unidentified flying objects.
Right.
So things are unidentified, and they are flying, and they are objects. And I think that's a perfectly rational way to describe a thing that's flying through the air that you don't know what it is. And so for you to then, for anybody to to then take that and make the leap to say that they know what it is, that is sort of jumping to a conclusion before you've gathered the evidence for what it is that you found. And the most fundamental question, the deepest, most important question that we can ask ourselves as human beings, as sentient creatures here in this tiny rock floating in the middle of this vast cosmos, is, are we alone? Right? It is the most important question that we can possibly ask. And it's definitely not an understatement to say that I've dedicated my life to helping in that search, to helping to communicate that search, to help people sort of come to grips with the wonder and scale of this search for life in the universe. I would say probably a third or a quarter of the episodes that I do on my YouTube channel are in some way connected to this topic. So there is, in my mind, no more important question that you can possibly ask. It fascinates me. The paradox of why we don't have evidence for aliens haunts me. You always go back to that Arthur C. Clarke question, like either the universe is either we're alone in the universe or we're not. I was just going to look for
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and both in the answer to both of those, right? Like if we're alone, that's weird because the universe is big and it's old, and life on Earth formed the moment that it could have. And there's no reason under the laws of physics why there shouldn't be a way that a technological civilization should be able to travel from world to world. Those all seem like they're givens. And yet, where is but then where is the evidence? And so just to finish this up, and so I feel like with a question that's that important, that fundamental, where the ramifications of the answer would have implications to every part of our society, you want to be sure. You want to feel like the evidence that has been gathered really supports the conclusion that it turns out we're not alone in the universe. And so people always ask me, like, do I believe in aliens? And my answer is always just like, I'm unconvinced by the evidence that has been provided so far. I absolutely believe that there are things that are unidentified and they are flying and they are objects, but I don't have a way to say what they are, and I don't believe that any of the evidence that has been provided so far indicates that they're aliens. And
Well,
boy, would I love to know if there's aliens.
Well, I'll agree
Please.
with you on that because I also say, I've said a number of times on the show that if someone tells you they know exactly what these things are, then run because no one really knows. And the reason, if it does boil down to evidence, we don't really know for sure. But I do believe I have an open mind in the topic, of course, because I had a UFO sighting that I absolutely could not explain what it was, and it's no technology that I don't think we've ever had the technology that I saw. And I do want to talk a little bit about that too. But so I think my personal view is that it's possible that we are being visited by alien intelligence. And the reason I think it's possible is a number of reasons. First of all, we're a very young civilization compared to what could be out there. I mean, we're a young solar system, and on and on. And if you think about if someone 150 years ago, if you handed them a walkie-talkie, today's walkie-talkie, they wouldn't understand it. Perhaps an intelligence out there has, and I think you kind of alluded to this, has learned how to travel the stars, has learned the physics of how to do it, whether it's bending space-time or whatever it is. So it is possible that we could be being visited. Otherwise, we have to come up with what else, what other thoughts could it be? Could it be interdimensional? There's people that think it could be that or time travel or, all kinds of things. But there's definitely something weird going on. And have you
I'm not sure that there's anything weird going on, but so we can have a conversation about that. But it's like, and so that's all. It really, it's just like, what does it take to convince you, right? So if you show me a box and the box is closed and you say, what's in the box? My answer is, I don't know, right? Mm-hmm. I can make some guesses about the size of things that could be in there, but really at the end, the answer is, I don't know. And until I can open the box and look inside and study, then I can make some conclusions. And so I feel like the only honest answer to say is, I don't know. And then I let the evidence convince me either way, right? So if something can be provided that is compelling evidence, then I will change my position in a heartbeat, right? You have experienced, or you believe, or that you have seen something that that you couldn't explain, but you can't make the leap, or I don't think it's the right thing to make the leap to then you know what it is, because then that closes you down to the possibilities for what it could be.
Sure.
And so it's sort of more like, for now, you're like, I saw something super weird and I don't know what it was, and until I have some way of knowing, that trail ends there for now. And then hopefully later on, some new piece of information is going to come your way. Someone's going to go, oh, turns out there was a flight that was going here. It was a new stealth bomber that was being tested by the Air Force, and they've written you a personal letter, and they've apologized for freaking you out, and here's all the evidence. You're like, oh, okay, new stealth aircraft. Got it. Okay, evidence supplied, and now I'm convinced. But until then,
yeah,
it has to remain in the I don't know category.
Right. Have you heard of the USS Nimitz case in 2004? There was a lot of talk about it. That was, the Navy was involved, and there was some filming. How about, did you happen to pay attention when the story came out December 16th last year about the Pentagon's search for UFOs?
I'd heard a bit about this, yeah, and I didn't look too deeply into it because it looked to me like a lot of blobs moving on a TV screen. So,
in that particular video, but just the fact that they were looking into the topic alone, and they actually admitted it.
And you can see why they would, right? Like again, the existence of aliens capable of traveling from world to world means someone essentially is technologically way beyond anything that we can possibly comprehend. It would be a serious threat to Earth and to the existing nations and all of that, right? It would be an existential threat. So it definitely makes sense to have a look around to just see if you can understand what's going on there, and then gather any evidence that you can find.
That's right. So let's see. I think it was called something like the Advanced Aerospace Threat Investigation Program. I believe that's what they called that. So it had threat right in the right in the title of it, which does make total sense.
And if I was part of the Defense Department, I would absolutely throw some money to some astronomers to point their telescopes in the sky and see if there's anything out there. And, there have been plenty of civilian attempts to perform really comprehensive searches of the sky. Some really interesting stuff that I love to report on. There's a lot of really great people are searching for evidence of advanced civilizations that have sort of messed up their atmospheres to the point that we could actually detect them. Other, the kinds of civilizations that maybe have enclosed their entire star in a Dyson sphere to be able to utilize all the power coming from the star. Potentially a civilization has wrapped up all of their stars in their entire galaxy in Dyson spheres, and these are they would actually give off a fairly telltale signature that we could see here on Earth, and comprehensive searches have actually been done for a lot of this stuff.
I think you've actually talked about that on your show, the Type 1, Type 2 civilizations, that type of thing. Yeah. I think that's really fascinating, and I know there was some question out there. I think it was, am I thinking the Tabby star, where there was a strange...
Yeah, and that one possibility for that was that it was an alien megastructure in the process of construction, which is a pretty fascinating and incredibly unlikely answer for it. The other answer was that it's probably dust, and now it turns out that it was dust.
Yeah, they did make, for the person that isn't aware, they did make more of a comprehensive discovery of what that actually was. But so do you think that programs like SETI, have a good value, or do you think
absolutely
you do? Good.
Yeah. I mean, look, back to what I said, right? Is the most important question that we could possibly, is it important to spend energy and money on that fundamental question? Absolutely. And there are some incredible ways that we should be doing this. SETI is just one. The SETI Institute is doing wonderful work trying to point more and more radio telescopes at more and more stars to try and see if you can detect any signals that would be coming from these other stars. There are new space telescopes in the works, like the James Webb Space Telescope,
right.
And one of its abilities is going to be to scan the atmosphere of planets orbiting other stars, searching for biosignatures, looking for evidence that there is some kind of life there that is, modifying the atmosphere of their planet. You've got other ideas, like just other methods of searching for life here in the solar system. You've got the Mars rovers, which are searching on the surface of Mars. You've got instruments searching the methane in the Martian atmosphere, which could potentially be a byproduct of life. And then you've got the potential for life in some of these icy ocean worlds like Enceladus and Europa. And NASA is sending a mission back to Europa whose job is to fly through and near these amazing plumes that are of water ice that are spewing out of Europa to sense if there's the chemicals of life in there. So if I could wave a magic wand and increase budget, I would really love to increase the budget that's going to SETI, to a lot of these, because we are now in striking distance of getting an answer to this question if we're alone. Like, amazingly, and I bring up this stat because it's so wonderful. There's a next generation telescope that's going to come out after James Webb called the LUVOIR, the Large Ultraviolet Infrared Telescope.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
And it's going to be an 15 to 18 meter space telescope. So when you consider that Hubble is 2.6 meters, James Webb is like 7 meters, this would be, a dramatically larger amount of resolving power. And one of the things that it should be able to do is observe the atmospheres of enough worlds around us to know with 90% accuracy whether there's life on any of those other worlds, or essentially to know if we're alone in the universe. So we, within 20 years, can answer to a 90% accuracy to say we're alone, or actually here's how many worlds, this is what percentage of worlds have life on them, and even here's what percentage of worlds out there have industrial civilizations on them. So it's an amazing time. We are just decades now away from being able to get answers to what we used to think were philosophical questions.
Right, right. I want to go back to Mars in just a little bit because I have some questions about that. But I just wanted to tell a quick story. Something you said reminded me of it. So a friend of the show became a friend of the show because he was actually an astronomer in England. And his story, when he started listening to my show, and he wrote me an email, and he actually came on the show and did astronomy news basically for a while. But anyway, the reason he got in touch with me and all that, he was telling me he was walking across, he didn't say a field, whatever it was in England, with his telescope over a tripod over his shoulder, and he said all of a sudden this big, huge, it looked like a half a mile wide triangle glided right over him, and he says, okay. So that really got him interested in the topic. Again, we're not saying, I agree with you that someone shouldn't jump on the alien bandwagon right away, but when people are having such strange things, are you saying basically that you don't want to try to guess what it is? You just know that it could be something.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's the best way to describe it. Is like if a person says they saw a thing, right? Then you've got two options. One is they're lying, and obviously there's examples of people making hoax videos, and that's definitely happened.
Yeah.
You look at crop circles, and I mean the people who made crop circles keep trying to tell people how they do it, and nobody will listen now, right? No one will believe them that they're the ones who invented crop circles, and they show you exactly how they did it. And or they saw something. And so then the question is, well, what did they see? Did they misunderstand what it was that they saw? And plenty of people see Venus or the International Space Station, which are surprisingly bright. I've had a few people email me and go every night I keep seeing this red UFO to the east, and I'm well, that's Mars, right? Where Mars is at its closest, brightest point right now, and you can see it better than you can in years, and that's why you never noticed it before, is because it's actually moving. So either it's a thing that is actually identified and they just don't know, and you can imagine a triangle going over your head. It could be geese, right? We have that here. But let's say it's something else, right? So then it just goes into the unidentified category.
Yeah.
And unless you can have a way to go back and understand it better, it just has to remain unidentified. And I'm more than again, I can't wait to find out the answer to these questions. So if people can present evidence that isn't hearsay, that's really the problem. Is you want an alien hydrospanner. You want to have an alien that you can show people. You want to see the spacecraft land and be able to bonk on the door. So those are the kinds of evidence. That's the evidence that then makes it a compelling answer to the question, what is it? And until you can get that answer, again, I just feel like the most honest response is just go, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I appreciate the I don't know, but a lot of times when, like for instance, this does happen a lot. Like my friend that saw the triangle go over, he's not the only one. A lot of people for some reason, are seeing these triangles. I mean, it's unbelievable how many triangular sightings they are, and a lot of them have lights on them. And the most known one that I'm aware of, well, there was the Belgium. They call it the Belgium flap back in the 90s for a few years, where there were so many witnesses. But I don't know if you ever heard of the Phoenix Lights. Have you ever heard of the Phoenix Lights? That was a sighting in Phoenix in March of 1997. where there was possibly up to, well, I don't know exactly how many thousand people, but several thousand people were outside watching the comet at the time. I can't remember the name of it.
Hakutaki.
1997.
Yeah, there's Hakutaki and there was Hale Bopp, and they all sort
I
of
think it
both
was
showed
Hale
up at the
Bopp
same time.
actually.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was. So anyway, they were outside and they all saw this huge, some people saying miles long, triangle go over. And even the governor of the state finally came out and admitted that he was in a park and watched it go over. So all I'm saying is I totally understand that alien is the wrong way to go with this. A possibility of alien in my mind is okay to go with it, but a lot of times you can't say something was like a flock of geese or something when there's that many people saying the same thing.
And again, when you look at the realm of possibilities, right? The possibility that the U.S. Air Force has some new kind of stealth bomber, right? We've seen them. They roll out a new stealth fighter and they roll out a new stealth bomber. So uh, if the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, or the Russians or the Chinese have a new kind of aircraft that no one's ever seen before, and it's designed to be hard to see, that can also explain what these things are. And really, until you go and watch it land and come over to it and take a sample of the material that it's made of, it just has to remain in the I don't know column.
And I agree with that. How in the particular case, everyone that I have ever heard talk about seeing something triangular go over, they all say the same thing all the way back to 1970s, is there's absolutely no sound, and a lot of times it's gliding, and so there's a lot of, it's a mystery. And as a matter of fact, I've been doing this show for 7 years now, just about 7 years now, and I don't know any more about it.
Mm-hmm.
What people are saying than I did to begin with, and I'm not going to say that I do. But it's always interesting getting someone like, your thoughts on something like this. And I realize that I could never say, hey, look, maybe it's something you may want to look into because you probably have no interest at all. But what would convince you?
I don't have the capability to look into it, right?
I understand, but all right. Well, let's say your curiosity, like it is in space in general, all of a sudden was sparked because you saw something really, really, really strange. Would you have a curiosity to try to figure out what it was, or would you just say, I don't know what it was, and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll give you some examples of things that I think are pretty fascinating. Like you think about the SpaceX. Have you seen some of the SpaceX launches going over Los Angeles
Mm-hmm.
and the really weird shapes that the rocket plume makes?
The spirals.
The spirals and the really big clouds that they form. And in those cases, tens of thousands of people with cell phone cameras and DSLR cameras took pictures and posted them to social media, and you saw this incredible flurry. So that's the kind of thing that generated, and it had an answer, right? We knew what it was. It was an identified flying object.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that I can totally get that if a person has a personal experience with something, then it becomes something that sort of sticks in their craw and they want to get to the bottom of it. And as you said, you've been going for 7 years. I'm sure you've asked every person that you can if they have any idea what it is that you saw, and nobody has an answer for you. So I would probably find it frustrating, and it would take over a chunk of my brain every now and then to kind of go, what was that thing that I saw? So I don't know. I haven't been there yet. I haven't. At no point has something appeared to me that I haven't known what it was so far. And
Mm-hmm.
so you've got a genuine mystery on your hands.
Yeah, and a lot of people do. And
Mm-hmm.
the one thing I found when I started doing this show is that there's a lot of very intelligent people that are fascinated with the topic. And you mentioned earlier that there are people that are doing hoaxes, and I totally agree. And I think It muddies the water. It really is hard for anyone to take the topic seriously if they're looking on YouTube, and they see all the CGI and all the work that people do. And there are some channels, the 3-4 channels that have a huge amount of following that are making.
I could think of some channels.
Yeah,
that I wish I had the kind of follow. You say I've got a lot of followers. They've got millions of followers.
Right.
I don't hold a candle to them.
Yeah, and they're making a ton of money on hoaxing, and so there is unfortunately that's part of it, and there's really nothing anyone can really do about it.
I wouldn't say that some of those channels are making money on hoaxing. I think that a lot of channels there are places where they are posing mysteries, and they are kind of making assertions about what is out there, and then not providing the evidence to match the conclusions that they're stating. And so, some of those channels just aren't doing a very rigorous job. I think it's really important to say, I mean, you listen to Astronomy Cast, and this is what we say. It's like what we know and how we know what we know, right? So if you make an assertion, then you want to back up that assertion with evidence, and just say the sun is a ball of hydrogen, right? Then you want to show all the lines of evidence that demonstrate that the thing that you said is a true thing. And otherwise, you can just go back to, I don't know what the sun is, or I don't know what came before the universe started, or all this stuff, right? So that's all. Again, it's like if you if you say something is true, then how do you know that it's true? And that's the gap. That's the step that I think a lot of people don't take.
Yeah, there are some shows, there are some channels, as you say, that do that. But there are a couple. There's 2 or 3 channels that I have brought up the topic on this show that actually do focus on hoaxing, to get their viewers, and that part is unfortunate. Going back, I said I'd talk about Mars a little bit, and we'll open the lines up for calls in a little bit here, and no breaks today. So anyway, going back to Mars, Mars at one time most likely had a magnetosphere, and how would you say the odds are that there could have been life on Mars at one time? There's definitely evidence of water.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't know, right? The search, the exploration of Mars is really the search for life, and originally when there was the Viking spacecraft that was sent back in the 1970s, it had an experiment on board that told them that there was life there, and now other scientists looked at the way the experiment was done. Essentially, they had they would take some soil, they would feed it and water it and look for gases that were going to come out, and they saw gases that they thought were evidence that there was life there. And other people said, well, you could have that exact same reaction if there wasn't life there, and people still argue about this to this day. And what the lesson that taught NASA really was, if you're going to run these kinds of experiments, if you're going to search for life on Mars, you have to be really, really, really careful about how you do this. And so the search for life on Mars has really been about the search for water on Mars. The Spirit and Opportunity were looking for the possibility that there was ever water on Mars at all. Curiosity, which is a very sophisticated robot, its job is to see how long water was on the surface of Mars. And now the next rover that's coming, the 2020 rover, its job is going to be to search to find out if the conditions were good for life on Mars for any great period of time, and if there's any evidence of past life on Mars. So we're getting closer and closer, and then possibly the next step is going to be some kind of sample return where people bring stuff back. And then the other really fascinating path to this is that I mentioned this earlier, that methane has been found in the atmosphere of Mars, and the thing with methane is that it is a gas that breaks down in sunlight very quickly. So if you see methane, then there must be some source. One source is volcanoes. One source could be life. And right now, planetary scientists are still trying to figure out which one of those could be. There's no question there's methane in the atmosphere of Mars. The question is there is life being what's producing the methane? So as we stand right now, we have no definitive answer. It's a fascinating question. There are really interesting hints. The fact that the water was definitely on the surface of Mars a long time ago, for long periods of time, that this methane is being seen in the atmosphere. These signs are pointing to yes, but we don't know if life could have gotten started and if it could have survived long enough. And so, again, and this is why, right? Back to the thing, like if you're going to say there's life on Mars, you want to be really sure. And the way you do that is you find just absolute overwhelming evidence that there's life on Mars. So it's wonderful to be in the middle of this mystery, right?
Yeah.
So many people, there's so many mysteries that we now look at and we're like, I don't know. How does gravity work? What's inside the atom? There's a lot of questions that we now have the answers to. We are at the end of the controversy. How do the continents form? Right? We now know that it's plate tectonics. There's so many of these mysteries, but we're in the middle of a bunch of these, watching them unfold in real time, watching the scientists gather the evidence and trying to figure out one way or the other what the answer is, and we should have definitive answers within our lifetimes.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be really fascinating. I mean, I would love to hear someday that they have definitive proof. What do you think what are your thoughts on the panspermia theory?
It's a fascinating concept, right? This idea that we know that, or the fact that if there is life in the solar system, that we're actually related to each other. And we know that asteroids have crashed into both Earth and Mars and Venus and all of these in the past, that these asteroid impacts have thrown material out into space, and that this material can travel from world to world. We have meteorites that came from Mars. We have meteorites that came from the moon, that came from Vesta. So we know that this process is happening. And in fact, it seems like it's relatively gentle, that you can have a space rock crash into Mars, throw debris into space. The debris can fly around the solar system for a few 100,000, few million years. One of these rocks can impact the Earth, can actually survive the re-entry through the atmosphere and actually keep the interior of it cool enough that life could survive. And so one of those first questions, if there is any evidence of life found on Mars, that first question is going to be, are we related? And again, both of those answers are really interesting. If we are related, when? When did we diverge from the life on Mars? How did life continue to change on Mars and be different from Earth? And if we are not related, then that is an even more interesting question, because then life formed twice in one solar system, which then makes the question of where is everybody even weirder, because now you're like, well, then there should be life everywhere. Life could form twice in one solar system, then there should be life in every solar system. And I think that would be the more unsettling, more troubling question, if you found life that wasn't related to Earth life, then you would have a very bizarre mystery on your hands.
Right. And there's people can speculate all kinds of things, but I mean, I always, when I get to thinking pretty deeply about the whole topic, the very first spark of life is always fascinating. How did that happen? And was it just, all random things happening at once that actually made it happen?
Yeah.
And where?
Yeah, we don't know, right?
Right.
Like literally just a great big question mark. Right. That there was a time when there was no life, and then there was a time there was life, and what could have made that happen? And there's been theories where people have attempted to take these primordial elements and put them together in a jar and shake them up and apply electricity, and interesting amino acids seem to form. So maybe that's part of the puzzle. There are the volcanic vents down at the bottom of the ocean and very interesting conditions down there that could potentially have been one of the places where life got started. But it is a gigantic question mark, and I guess would lead to potentially, if you did find life on Mars and it was related to Earth, maybe the life came from Mars. But then, of course, that just pushes the question back one planet, right? And then you're like, well, how did it get started on Mars? Maybe it floated in from another solar system entirely. Well, how did it get started over there? Like you at some point have to get to the bottom of that question, and it might be, and you would know you've got the answer when you put all the right chemicals in an experiment, run the right amount of electricity, and you get the first life form forming in there. Then you'd know, okay, we're on the right track. But until someone can actually do that right now, the only responsible answer is to say, I don't know. And this people who watch what I do, like, this comes up a lot. Like, we talk about open-mindedness. And that's just like, open-mindedness is to say, I don't know. Let's find out. I would love to know the answer to this question, just like you. I want to be sure. So until then, I'm just going to have to just say, I don't know.
Right. Well, I have the call number up on the screen on YouTube for those of you over there now that would like to call in and ask our guest a question. Feel free to dial that number. It's up there, 603-967-4030. I think I remembered, I didn't hear this on your show, but I think I remembered reading somewhere that our magnetosphere seems to be weakening. Have you heard anything along that line?
I haven't heard that it's weakening, but the magnetosphere is drifting. So the North Pole, the magnetic North Pole of Earth, wanders around my country of Canada, and so, like, where a compass points north has been changing over decades. Now, it could very well be that this is just going to go on and that it just wanders around, that what we thought was one point was actually a region, and just over long periods of time the magnetic north shifts. But there is absolutely evidence that in the past the magnetic field has flipped. And we see this on the sun every 11 years or so. Every 22 years is the full cycle. The magnetosphere on the sun flips around. And so the north magnetic pole of the sun becomes the south magnetic pole, and then vice versa. And you get this period where it shifts over. And geologists can see the direction of the magnetic field in lava. So you have lava flows that are magnetized. You can actually see they're aligned to the magnetic field, and then shortly after that, you can see the magnetic field going in the opposite direction. So it's entirely possible that when we know that this magnetic field reversal happens on a random but regular basis, who knows when the next one could happen. But the fact that we're here, the fact that life is here, we know that the impact of that is not devastating. We know that
Well, it sure
there doesn't
screw
seem to
things
be
up
any
for a
mass.
while.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be mass die-off that goes along with the magnetic field reversal. So it could very well be that we're all going to have to buy new compasses at some point.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
GPS is going to go to heck.
But the other opportunity is the fact that, again, here in Canada, I get to see the Northern Lights, the auroras, and a lot of people who live further to the south don't get a chance to see it. But if you got to a point where the fields were flipping around, you might have access to auroras in weird locations as the magnetic fields are turning to these strange pockets around the planet. So could be that opportunity to finally see an aurora if you haven't had one yet.
Yeah, they're amazing. So we have a caller on the line. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from? Caller,
Hi, Martin.
There? Yeah.
It's your neighbor. How are you?
Is this Donnie?
It sure is.
You're not going to be my neighbor for long. We'll talk about that.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave everyone in suspense. So you have Donnie's a Boston police officer, and he has I live up in Maine, and near a lake, and he has a place out on a lake up here. He comes up and visits. He sits in studio now and then. So he's a retired Boston police officer and now works. You're in South America. You work in South America, right?
Well, I work all over the globe.
Oh, okay. So, how you doing, Darn? You have a question for the guest?
Yeah, I put it on the chat line.
I'm sorry, I haven't
And
been able to watch that. I'm alone tonight, so I don't have help.
Yeah, I can see the reflection in your glasses, Martin.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
one of the question I have for your guest, being an astronomer, is there was a substantial conversation about outside of the solar system, and just recently about the Earth itself. But what we haven't touched upon really is the moon. And recently it's been announced, unless I'm gravely mistaken, that the People's Republic of China is going to be exploring the dark side of the moon. And my question is actually twofold. Firstly, it's been my understanding that the United States has researched the dark side of the moon. And second, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the second part of it is, why would they be going there to the dark side of the moon? What is there to discover that hasn't previously been discovered or divulged to the public in general? We know that it probably can't be colonized. It's probably not sustainable, or perhaps it is. But I'd like to hang up and hear Fraser's comments on that.
All right. Did you say there was a two-part question? You'd have another part of that, or was that the two parts?
Well, no. The first part is if it's a mistaken assumption or not that the United States has explored the dark side of the moon. I believe that we have.
All right.
So I'd like to clear that up. And secondly, I would like to know what has piqued the People's Republic of China's interest in exploring the dark side of the moon, particularly at this phase of our historical development.
All right. Hey, thanks for the call, Donnie.
Thanks for the call.
Good talking to you, Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll tackle both those halves there. So right. So there's no dark side of the moon. It's the far side of the moon. The whole moon gets illuminated. And Pink Floyd has sort of made our lives miserable for decades, right? But the moon is tidally locked to the Earth, and so it always shows the same face to the Earth. When you look up at the moon, you always see the same side, and of course the moon takes 27 and a half days to go all the way around the Earth. And so it turns once every month and always shows the same face to us. And this is thanks to gravity from the Earth. So there is a near side to the moon and there is a far side to the moon. And for the longest time, humanity had never seen the far side of the moon. We only saw what we could see from here on Earth in great detail, but we couldn't see the rest of it. And it wasn't really until the space age, until the first spacecraft were sent to actually go and take a look at it. And what they found is that the far side of the moon actually looks dramatically different from what the near side of the moon looks like. On the near side of the moon, we see these beautiful mare, these huge, what were thought to be oceans in the past, and now we know are ancient lava flows across the surface of the moon. On the far side of the moon, you don't see that. You instead see this pockmarked cratering that is a lot more like densely cratered than what we see on the close side of the moon. It's a lot more boring, actually. It's funny. We get the really interesting side of the moon to look at and not the other side of the moon. So your caller is exactly right. NASA's the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has been orbiting around the moon now for quite a while and taking really high resolution images of the entire moon, scanning the surface down to a resolution of a couple of meters. They can see every crater. They've seen all of the Apollo landers. They've seen all of the other rovers that have been on the surface of the moon. And the Chinese, as their first attempt to go to the moon, put down a rover on the near side of the moon. And the reason you do that is because you can communicate with them, right? You can send them signals and go, now turn left, and then the spacecraft or the rover can turn left and drive, right? When you push it to the far side of the moon, then you have no way to directly contact your rover. So what the Chinese have done is they have launched a spacecraft, a communications relay satellite, to the far side of the moon, to the L2 Lagrange point, which is, you've got sort of the L1 Lagrange point is this gravitationally stable point in between the Earth and the Moon. Then there's another one on the far side of the Moon, and there's one on the far side of the Earth, but they're not using that one. So this relay satellite is already there and waiting, and its job is going to be to relay information from this new Chinese rover when it arrives. So later this year, Chinese are going to send this rover. It's going to reach the far side of the Moon. It's going to land, and then it's going to be able to analyze and study an environment that we just have no samples have been extracted. None of these places have been looked at closely. All of the Apollo landings, all of the previous rovers, they've all gone to the near side of the Moon. This is the first time that anyone's gone to the far side. So I think the best way to describe it is they are stepping out into a place that everybody has been that has never considered it to be important enough to check out. Or never had the resources or whatever, the priority, they're the ones going to be the first to rove around on the far side of the Moon. And that's a way to stick a feather in their cap.
Interesting. Thank you. I want to just tell you about a quote that I had. I had an astrophysicist on this show once that was a visiting senior scientist at NASA for a few years. I think that's what he said his title was. A really interesting guy. We have someone else calling in. I'll take the call. Caller, hang in there for a minute. We'll get right to you. Hang in there. So anyway, his message that he said during the show kind of shocked me, but I thought it was interesting, probably made a lot of sense. And that was if a civilization gets through the bottleneck of technology without blowing themselves up, then they will likely be traveling the stars. And I just wondered what you thought about that phrase.
Yeah, there is, and I mentioned that earlier, right? There is no reason, according to the laws of physics, why you can't theoretically travel from star to star. I mean, there was an asteroid, now thought to be a comet, Oumuamua, that had been found traveling from some other star system. Astronomers recently did an estimate that there are probably tens of thousands of asteroids and comets here in the solar system that came from other star systems. So if a rock can do it, you would think that a robot could make the journey at the very least. Who knows whether we would have the ability to send living creatures to make that journey, but a robot, it seems like it should be possible. So there is this concept, I don't know if you've talked about it much, this idea called the Great Filter, that one of the possibilities why we seem to be alone in the universe is that there is some fate that all intelligent civilizations meet, which ends their ability to become a spacefaring species. And if that's true, we are just around the corner from it.
Yeah, I don't think we're too far from it.
And we can see potential things that could be causing it: nuclear war, artificial intelligence, bioengineering, asteroid impacts, global warming. Like, we can see a bunch of potential existential threats that we could be facing. But the weird part about it is that if you can see them, then you can try to predict and prevent them. And so it could very well be that it's something that we can't even predict, that happens to all civilizations 100%, and nips their exploration goals in the bud, which is it's a haunting thought for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think we're going to be our own destructor myself. Whether it's nuclear or whatever. We have a caller on the line. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
Jim from British Columbia.
Oh, Jim, you've been on before, I believe. Hi, Jim. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I do, Fraser. You were talking about the origin of life on Earth, and there was an article in Scientific American back in the 1990s, and the title of the article was RNA Hypothesis, and it hypothesized that the first thing to appear in the world's oceans was a self-replicating RNA molecule. And this makes very good sense in organic chemistry, because the RNA molecule in life is in between the DNA and the protein, right? So it's a kind of a central primary molecule, right? Now, if you look at the probability of a self-replicating molecule, RNA molecule, forming in the global ocean, it might look pretty unlikely, but when you consider the size of the global ocean and the time period involved, you had these molecules bouncing off each other at a tremendous rate. You have a huge number of molecules and fragments of molecules bouncing off each other and reacting into all kinds of forms and shapes, and almost everything would be possible. Almost every combination and permutation would be possible simply because of the numbers of reactions going on simultaneously. And then you have, in some parts of the global ocean, you have liquid rock, lava. In other places you have lightning, etc. So you have varying conditions all over the global ocean in chemical, pH and different properties, chemical properties. So it seems to me that that's a very good possibility that could happen. It may seem unlikely, but the probability of it can be compared to, let's say, dealing a royal flush from a deck of cards. Now, that's very unlikely, but if you have 10 to the 23rd decks of cards, dealing a hand every second, do you understand the math of it? Hello?
Yeah, I mean, whatever that first life form was, you can kind of imagine that all you needed was something that could bootstrap into a more complicated version of itself. That you needed whatever it was. Somehow it was like whatever is the simplest possible life form that can make a copy of itself. And that is what you would expect to find. And as you said, that early environment with all of these chemicals and no competition, right? And that's the part that's so interesting as well, is why did life not start twice? Why don't we have two life forms, two separate trees of life here on Earth, both of which have a mysterious beginning? That would tell you that life was inevitable to form. And so as much of a mystery is the fact that life formed at all, right? Is that we don't see multiple forms of life. It's, again, so weird. Life formed as soon as it could, and yet it only did it once. And it only created multicellular life once, which is an even more weird thing.
Okay, but I'll test your hypothesis, and that is life maybe did form twice. Maybe one was RNA-based, one was DNA-based, and they combined into one. And we have life forms on Earth where we have had those combinations of single-celled organisms with other kinds of single cells, and then we have the mitochondria inside a cell. So maybe it did happen twice. Maybe the evidence is there. I haven't seen a further analysis of the biochemistry and organic chemistry of that, but it would be very interesting.
And it is absolutely the other most interesting question you can ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like every permutation of it is absolutely fascinating, and I love this. I'm less experienced with this, and I'm less able to make sense of the biochemistry. But I find the search for it absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait. I read every little new insight with great interest as people test this out. And this whole discovery of these volcanic vents at the bottom of the oceans really added a lot of really interesting fuel to the theories, because now you had this other environment that had all the right conditions for life, and perhaps was even more protected and more extreme, which is the kind of place that life could form. So again, it's still such a big mystery.
And then there are the slimes, the subsurface lithoautotrophic ecosystems on Earth, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they were found on Mars as well, because the conditions for slimes are on Mars, or in Mars, I should say. They're in the rock, right? You have rocks that contain chemical energy, and you have the organic molecules and the water deeper in Mars. So I think that's a very good... My estimate is well over a 50% chance of living life on Mars now. That's my opinion.
You mean now, right now?
Yes, now. Living life on Mars now.
You mean like...
in the form of slimes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that methane mystery that I mentioned earlier is a pretty compelling piece of evidence, and and that the methane came from life, or that the methane came from volcanoes, is a question that can be answered, and the answer is going to be very interesting. I don't know if I give it a 50% chance, but I wouldn't, I would give it like a 30% chance. Like we're in the same couple of tens of percentages.
Hey, Jim, thanks
Yeah.
so much for the call.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye now. So,
I'm also in British Columbia, so
oh, yeah.
nice
how
to hear a
about that?
familiar accent.
Ah, got it. Speaking of that, you have a lot of cloudy weather there, don't you? I mean, is it hard to get out there with a telescope a lot of the time?
Yeah, so I don't bother. I have a great partnership with Oceanside Photo and Telescope, which is a telescope shop out of San Diego, which has perfect weather, and they're building remote telescopes around the world, and they let me use their remote telescopes. So
That's nice.
a couple of times a week, actually, if people are interested, on my Twitch channel and on my YouTube channel, I hook up these telescopes to the internet. To a live stream, and then I just like take requests and just observe stuff in the night sky. So we call these virtual star parties, and we'll go after 10, 20, 30 objects that are in the night sky tonight and just take pictures live. So you want to see Andromeda Galaxy, you want to see the Helix Nebula. If there's comets, we'll try and observe them as well, and we have a lot of fun. So that's the way I get around it is I use technology, and I use telescopes that are located in places with much better weather than me to be able to still do the observing.
That makes sense, total sense. A couple of questions I have for you in astronomy in general, and I do want to talk about asteroids too, but the Big Bang. The Big Bang is always it's so hard to conceive. And it's so hard to conceive what could possibly have been before it. Do you think it's possible that we may have some part of that theory wrong, or do you think we have it sewn up?
The evidence for the Big Bang, and like I think it's really important to separate this, right? So the idea of the Big Bang is this discovery that was made 80 years ago that galaxies in the universe are moving away from us in all directions. And so if you look in every direction, you see these galaxies, and they are and the methodology of measuring the distance, the rate that these galaxies are moving away from us is very accurate, very precise. And so you come to this conclusion that these galaxies are all moving away. So then you ask yourself, well, if you just run the clock backwards, was there a time when what are all these galaxies that are moving away from us were closer together, right? And that is really at the heart of it. That's all the Big Bang says. The Big Bang says the universe is less dense today, and it was more dense in the past. And you can run the clock back all the way back until 13.8 billion years ago, at a time when the universe was as dense as the heart of a star, and run the clock even further back than that to a point when the universe was so hot and so dense that atoms themselves wouldn't form. They were just this soup of hot energy. And then something caused this expansion to happen. What caused the expansion? We don't know. What came before the expansion? We don't know. The Big Bang's job is to not tell you what came before. All the Big Bang says is, this is weird. The universe is expanding. That means it was probably close together in the past. And astronomers have searched for evidence that the universe was close together in the past, and they find it in the cosmic microwave background radiation, this time when the moment when the universe had cooled down to the point that light was able to escape into the universe. When they look at the quantities of hydrogen, like the ratio between hydrogen and helium, because for a certain amount of time, the entire universe was acting like a star, and it was actively fusing hydrogen into helium. And so astronomers have found this and many more other lines of evidence that say, yes, indeed, the universe is expanding. It was more dense in the past and was really, really dense 13.8 billion years ago. But evolution is a great example of a similar question that you ask yourself, right? Do we see bacteria changing? Do we assume that thanks to evolution, natural selection, different bird species diverge from one another? Yes, the evidence is overwhelming on so many levels. Where did that first life form come from? Don't know.
Yeah.
Evolution's job is not to answer that question. Evolution just says, look at all this stuff changing. It's some other theory's job to figure out where that first life form came from.
Wow. We have a caller on the line. Hold on just one moment. I have one quick other question. I know you don't like to guess about anything, but I'm going to ask you to guess anyway. Do you think that there was time before the Big Bang?
Well, we're now sort of going beyond my pay grade as a journalist, but the people that I have talked to, space and time are connected. And this is one of the things that Einstein helped us understand with his theories of relativity. And so it really does seem like you can't have time without the space, without the universe, and that time is part of it. So was there time before the universe? We don't know.
Yeah, it's another huge question.
Are there other universes where time exists in different ways? We don't know. There are one example. There's this idea of inflation. One of the explanations, like the Big Bang, has a bunch of in its current form has some things that it doesn't explain very well about observations that have been made in the universe. And so this additional theory called inflation to help explain what happened in the earliest moments of the universe has been proposed. And now astronomers are searching for evidence of this inflationary period. But one of the things that it requires is the creation, literally that there are other universes as well. So you kind of can't have one without the other. And so it could very well be that there was time, and it could very well be that time is part of the universe. But again, these are the questions you ask cosmologists, not space journalists.
Okay. Caller, welcome to the show. Your first name and where are you calling from?
This is Bobby from North Carolina.
Oh, Bobby, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Great. You have a question for our guest?
Actually, I got two observations. First of all, I really don't believe your guest. I think he really has seen a UFO and doesn't want to mention it. Right now, he pretty much looks like the character that played Ronnie, played by Richard Dreyfuss on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And he looks like he's got some kind of severe sunburn going.
Yeah. Yeah, I just came back from 2 weeks in the Caribbean.
Ah, see, that's evidence. That's evidence, Bobby. Yeah.
And the Caribbean's dangerous. You could have missing time down there really easily.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of triangles going on there.
The other thing you brought up, the Oumuamua asteroid that came by the Earth, I find it really interesting that it came in at a really perfect trajectory. It came in between the Sun and Mercury and came up from the southern hemisphere of the Earth at a very high velocity, really fast. It wasn't seen till actually it had passed the Earth because it was so dark. They're saying it's a comet now because apparently it did a course trajectory as it was leaving the solar system. And, an asteroid shouldn't do a course trajectory, but if it was a comet, it should have outgassed when it passed by the Sun, and they would have seen it then. The other thing that I find really interesting about that is it was radar imaged, and 0 images of it had been released. It's reported it was 15 kilometers wide and 77 kilometers long, so it was roughly cylindrical shape. And I just find it really odd that no radar images at all have been released. And I'll take my answer off the air there.
All right. Hey,
Thanks,
Bobby.
Martin.
Thanks.
So that idea of Oumuamua that was was discovered last year in a really interesting trajectory, one that indicated that its source was outside of the solar system. As soon as it was discovered, I mean, this is the way these observations work. There's this network of astronomers, and someone says, I'm seeing something weird. Can anyone confirm this? You can actually go back and watch these conversations unfold between astronomers. And more people came online and observed the same object and saw the same kind of motion that it was making. And as your caller exactly said, as it moved through past the sun, it didn't create a coma, didn't in the way that a comet would, and so they made the assumption that it was an asteroid. But then the trajectory that it took had the kind of random drifting that comets tend to do as they are outgassing. And so the answer right now is that it probably was a comet. But why didn't it demonstrate a coma is still a mystery. Exactly how it's outgassing is still a mystery as well. I don't know of any radar images that were attempted to be taken of it. A lot of the times they do. In fact, there's a really cool comet that's going to be passing the Earth shortly. They call it the Halloween comet. It's this really, it looks like a skull, and
Right. Yeah.
and so astronomers will actively fire radar at one of these objects. Then they see the images that bounce back, and then they can analyze them. One thing that's great, talking about the SETI Institute, they turned the telescopes of the Breakthrough Listen Array at Oumuamua to try and see if they could detect any signal coming from it. And apparently, if you were on the surface of Oumuamua with a cell phone, they would have detected it. So,
wow.
So I was not. I can even just Google. If anyone had done any radar images of it, but I haven't seen anything. The shape that they knew of, they used with they essentially looked at the brightness of the object, and they could tell that it was brightening and dimming in a way that showed that it was tumbling, and they could tell what the dimensions were, that it was very cylindrical shaped. And the problem is that it's moving through the solar system at 60 kilometers per second and is gone. And that was our shot, and there's no way to catch up with it and look at it any better. So until the next one comes along, we're going to have to say goodbye to that one.
I know on your astronomy cast, I've heard you and Pamela say a number of times, the universe is just trying to kill us. I believe that's one of your favorite sayings, right?
It definitely is. It could have tried harder with this one because it wasn't very close. But yeah, absolutely, the universe is a large and hostile place that doesn't care about us one bit.
That's right. Yeah, and it's hard when you're walking around everyday life and you're looking up at the beautiful blue sky to know that it's almost like the Truman Show. It's open up above. Anything can fall in. Like, I don't know if you ever saw that when a light falls down or something. But but we're just so vulnerable. We're vulnerable because we're going through space at whatever it is, 40,000 miles an hour. I don't even know what it is. Anything can happen. And this leads me to the topic of asteroids because we're on it right now. And I remember there was an astronaut that started some type of foundation to look into protecting us from asteroids. How important? I think it's very important myself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm a little bit mixed. So it used to scare me more than it does today, and then maybe that's because more of these objects have been discovered. But you're talking about the B612 Foundation,
That's exactly right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And their goal was to really push this idea that we're just one bad space rock away from destruction. And it's absolutely true. When you look back through history, many of the great extinctions that have happened here on Earth were caused by an asteroid. It is not a question of if, it's a matter of when another big space rock is going to crash into the Earth and do a lot of damage. The last time one was really destructive was 65 million years ago. So we've seen things like Tunguska. And we saw the Chelyabinsk meteor that crashed over Russia back like 10 years ago now.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Seems like a few years, yeah.
So so we see that we are still in a shooting gallery. It turns out that probably there's a dozen events like Chelyabinsk that happen every decade. So if one of those, like a Tunguska, hits a city, then the loss of life would be enormous. So that's definitely a concern. NASA has had a bit of a mandate to search for a large percentage of the most dangerous asteroids, and they've completed that. So we now know that there are no dangerous Yucatan Peninsula kind of asteroid impacts coming our way, but there is still an enormous number in that 10 meter to kilometer range. And so there's a couple of missions in the works that will potentially try to track these down, both ground and space-based. There's one called NEOCAM, Near Earth Object Cam, which is going to be a space telescope that will scan the skies in the infrared spectrum looking for these cooler asteroids. And then there is there's a ground-based observatory that I'm really excited about called the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, and it is going to be this amazing instrument that scans the entire night sky at a really high resolution every couple of days.
Is that
So every couple of nights.
I'm sorry.
It's going to be out of Chile.
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
with all of the other big observatories down in Chile. Yeah.
The sky's so
Yeah.
clear there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of get up into the high Andes and get in the desert, and there's a lot of space for observatories down there. It's kind of a shame that there won't be a version in the northern hemisphere. So the southern hemisphere will know, but the north is a mystery. And that's actually a bigger problem in astronomy right now. Is there's a lot more observatories getting built into the southern hemisphere and not as many in the north. But yeah, and so the LSST on its own, as part of all the other things that it does, discovering dwarf planets and finding supernovae and all that, it could be the instrument that finds 90% of the dangerous space rocks within a decade. So we are now around the corner of being able to do that. Now, once you have found them, then you need to find out whether you can stop them. And so there is a bunch of other missions that are in the works. And the one that NASA is working on right now is called DART. And I forget what the acronym stands for, but the gist is that they're going to try to redirect an asteroid. So they're
gravitational?
They're going to slam an impactor into an asteroid and then find out how much that they were able to change the trajectory of the asteroid, and then use that as a way to figure out whether what it'll take if we do find a potentially dangerous asteroid down the road. So it's work that's overdue, in my opinion, and I'm glad that this is being done. And the only way to know if there's anything we can do about these things is to try to do things about them. And until we have done this, we won't know what's the best way. People always ask me, what's the best way to stop an asteroid? And the answer is, I don't know. We don't know. We haven't done the experiments yet, right? We haven't tried moving them with a gravity tractor. We haven't tried banging into them. We haven't tried shooting them with a laser. We haven't tried painting them. We haven't tried attaching a solar sail. We haven't tried attaching a maglev, a mass driver to them, and try firing debris off of them. We haven't tried hitting them with a nuclear weapon. Like, there's so many things that we can do to asteroids, and we don't know which one is going to be the one that helps us protect Earth. So I want to try them all.
I think we should. Now, you mentioned earlier, and I don't remember if you said it was an asteroid or what it was, but there was evidence that it had traveled through another solar system besides ours. Do you remember that?
That was the Oumuamua that I was talking about.
Oh, okay,
earlier.
So that was that. So in particular, this is just a hypothetical, is it possible that we may someday encounter, say, a cluster of asteroids that were just plain unknown because we had never seen them before, or they were in a part where our lifetime, our as far as we've had the ability to look, the last time it came close was way beyond that?
Well, I mean, there are the comets, the long period comets that come from the Oort cloud, and when they make their journey down into the middle of the solar system, they're making their first journey from the edges of space, and so of the solar system. So So those guys, and they may take them 1,000,000 years or 100,000 years to fall in from the Oort cloud down into the inner solar system and make a close flyby of the sun and then back out. So those are the ones, and there's really no way to predict or prevent them. They come out of nowhere. They're coming at tremendous velocities. They zip through the inner solar system and they fly back out again. And you may have months to prepare for the impact of a comet like that. Those are the ones. These interstellar objects that are moving 60 kilometers a second on a hyperbolic orbit. You would have no way to prevent them as well. If one was on a direct impact with Earth, it would just come out of nowhere and hit the Earth, and you would have really no warning beyond maybe a couple of weeks at most.
Do you think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, but the ones that we're most concerned with are the ones that we see all the time, the near Earth objects that jostle each other and constantly pass over the Earth's orbit, and smaller ones are slamming into our atmosphere all the time. Like there are those really rare events that could happen, but most likely it's going to be from one of these objects that we see all the time that we're constantly, but that are buzzing around the Earth's orbit.
Right. And do you think it would be like in the movies if there was a killer asteroid coming to Earth and there was nothing that could be done? Do you think it would be like in the movies that the governments of the world would not say anything? I mean, what could you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, the things you can't hide an asteroid. So
too many
it doesn't matter that I mean, this is what happened with Oumuamua, right? Is that an astronomer found it, communicated with other people, said, "Can you confirm this is a thing?" Other people confirmed it, and everybody then began making their observations. The night sky is being scanned by tens of thousands of people every night, and every object is visible and seen. So it's not like there's like one shadowy group with access to the most powerful telescope and they're the ones who decide what gets told. The night sky is available to all of us, and we can all look at it, and a lot of really interesting discoveries come from amateur astronomers. That's how comets get their names, is that people get to find them and then they get to name them. So I don't think there's any possible way that you could hide, that any one group could control what's being seen, because anybody can do the math, right? You find an object, you do the math, and you're like, that's going to hit the Earth. Yeah. Right, and then you tell people. So it's not the kind of thing that there would be any sort of centralized control over that information.
It's only in the movies.
It's only in the movies.
Yeah. So you mentioned supernova, or supernovae is however you say it. If there was, and I do want to talk a little more about what can kill us, because I think it's interesting. But so if there was a supernova in our galaxy, are we toast?
No. Okay. No. Supernova would need to go off within really just a few dozen light years from us to cause us any kind of damage. So there are definitely no stars that are going to go supernova that are close enough to us. So from that, we are pretty safe.
Yeah.
And gamma ray bursts, on the other hand, they can reach out across an entire galaxy. But we do, again, it doesn't look like there's any stars that we know of that are close enough or pointing their poles at us that if the star did detonate and generate a gamma ray burst, we would have a problem. So now it's entirely possible that those are the causes of mass extinction events in the past. But right now, it doesn't seem like it's a really big concern. I mean, a black hole could pass through the solar system and could wreak enormous havoc, but then the solar system has been moving along for 4.5 billion years so far, so the chances of that happening seem pretty remote. The existential crises that we face feel like they are the ones of our own making. They are the nuclear war. They are the threat from artificial intelligence, of bioengineering, from climate change, things like that. that's the wild card, and that's if you had me think about the things that I'm most concerned about, I'm not at all concerned about natural threats, and 100% concerned about what human beings are doing and what we're working on, and think that we haven't really thought through the consequences of what those could cause.
I've had discussions about AI that
Yeah.
gets really scary.
It gets really scary really fast. Yeah. And
Yep.
that's my background is in computer science, and
Oh, that's right.
and
Yeah.
I know how badly computers can behave. So,
I mean, the
I think about,
replicating things and,
Yeah.
the commands and, all that
yeah.
is
And it
very,
just gets creepier, every year that goes by as our artificial intelligence gets better and more capable, and things that we used to think were impossible are now done by technology. You start to go, someone should really look at what's going on and try and figure out a way to minimize the impact of it.
right. Just to remind the listener on YouTube, I'm solo tonight, so I don't have any way to check into the chat room. So if anyone wants to pose a question, you can call in. That number's up on the screen. So I want to talk a little bit. Let's see, we have, it looks like about 10 or 12 minutes left here. Can we talk a little bit, another mystery? There are so many mysteries when it comes to space. And, is dark matter. I mean, that is such a mystery. And do you think, I don't know in your lifetime, but do you think that mystery can be solved someday?
Well, we don't know. Dark matter is one of those really fascinating mysteries that we mentioned earlier, that there are mysteries that we are in the middle of, and dark matter is absolutely one of these, right? That there is an enormous amount of evidence that we are not seeing the whole universe, that the vast majority of the mass that's out there is some kind of invisible matter that we can't detect. Now, astronomers have gotten better and better at figuring out where this stuff is. They can detect the effect of its gravity and are able to map out with incredible precision the concentrations of it. And I always laugh that we don't know what the stuff is, but we can use it as a telescope, which is so bizarre. We can use it to focus the light for more distant objects, but we don't know what it is. But and so up until it's still sort of an undecided mystery about whether there's some invisible mass or gravity doesn't work the way we expect at the largest scales. But there are a lot of experiments in the works right now. There are particle detectors at the bottom of old nickel mines in Sudbury. There is a cosmic ray detector on board the International Space Station. There's a gigantic neutrino observatory that is a cubic kilometer of ice at the South Pole called IceCube. There are Japanese detectors. There are probably the CERN. They're trying to make dark matter at CERN. They've got another idea they're looking for called axions at CERN. So there are I would say there are dozens of experiments right now, dozens of detectors, dozens of different ways that people are trying to search for some kind of evidence of dark matter. It's weird to be living in this universe that we don't know what the vast majority of it is made of, and dark energy is an even bigger mystery. We don't even know what that is.
It's going to follow up with that, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's great to just be, again, like people are. It's funny. I always find this really weird that it bothers people that this mystery hasn't been solved yet, and yet we stand at the conclusion of so many other mysteries that have been solved, and so this feeling that you have of not knowing the route forward, of not knowing what the final destination is going to be, to what the answer is, that discomfort and curiosity is how you know that you have a genuine mystery on your hands. And the only way to find out what the answer is, just keep digging around and searching for evidence and trying to find answers and see where you get. And will it be happening? I think dark matter astronomers, I feel that they will have gotten to the bottom of this mystery, or particle physicists. They will know better what it is within my lifetime, I hope. Dark energy, I'm not so sure, but I think every year that goes by, they are at least figuring out what it isn't, which is a good place to start.
Yeah.
So they
Elimination. Yeah.
Yeah, they're eliminating the crazy ideas that aren't panning out, and eventually you really start to narrow down what you're looking for, and you can get a better sense. You'll start to see more subtle hints. So I hope within the next couple of decades we figure out at least we have a better idea about what it isn't.
Right. Now, does this have to do with the theory of relativity? Part of it, any part of it, and how that works?
Not that I'm aware of.
I must be thinking of something else totally. Okay, now I want to say I have a friend who's an astronomer, and I told him that I had Pluto planet separation anxiety. So now is Pluto back to being a planet, or what is going? There's some type of debate. I didn't really read much about it, but I saw something.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that Pluto was deplaneted. About that was like our first show of Astronomy Cast, was us explaining why Pluto had gotten deplaneted, and we just did another episode where like, nope, still not a planet. So that's unfortunate. Or it's the right answer. But no, there are proposals. The IAU, the International Astronomical Union, needs to make a decision about maybe it is or isn't a planet.
I heard Pamela talk about in the episode that they need to vote and not in person.
Yeah, so it could very well be that it'll come up to a vote. And there's been some interesting proposals where people have said, well, maybe it's the some other maybe change the definition of what it is, so that any object that can really hold itself into a sphere is good enough to be a planet. So right now, so then you would end, even the moon would be a planet. So you'd have 100 plus planets in the solar system. I personally don't really find the debate very interesting, because it's like it's all just subjective, and each world is interesting in its own right, and we are finding more like the whole reason why Pluto is no longer a planet is because an object the same size as Pluto, Eris, was found farther out in the solar system. So you were never going to go, like, now you've got another planet. So now you got 10 planets. So we were never going to have the 9 planets, including Pluto, ever again. And as more and more of these objects are found, these numbers are going to have to change. Science is this living thing. As new evidence is discovered, people's opinions change. And so if anyone's like, it's 8 planets, or if it's 9 planets, including Pluto, like, what about Eris? Like, doesn't Eris get to be a planet too if Pluto does? Same size.
Now,
So
I don't know if you've done a show in the past about this topic, and we have 5 minutes left here. Is basically, what about space travel? What do you think the future of space travel with technology? Do you think that's going to improve to the point where we can actually do more of it?
Oh yeah. When you look at what's happening with SpaceX, with the development of their spacecraft, and especially the new one they're working on, the BFR, the big Falcon rocket, the big freaking rocket, this is a spacecraft that is fully reusable. This was thought to be impossible, and now they're in the process, we hope, of creating a spacecraft where both the first stage and the top stage are both fully reusable. And suddenly, for the first time, you can launch cargo into space without having to throw away your rocket. That, when this system gets operating, the BFR is going to be the least inexpensive rocket that has ever been launched. It's just the price of fuel. It's a couple $1 million of fuel, and you launch this thing and recover it and fill it with cargo and launch it again. When you're dropping the price of access to space down by a factor of 100, the kinds of things that are possible are just mind-bending. In theory, the BFR should be able to take off, fly to the moon, land on the moon. People can get out, explore the moon, get back in the spacecraft, fly back to Earth. Like, just as one of the things that it does. It should be capable of flying to Mars with refueling. So I think that we are about to enter an age where what it is possible to launch is dramatically widened, where it makes sense to launch a constellation of 5,000 satellites to provide better internet for the entire planet. That it makes sense to start thinking about things like, let's put our heavy manufacturing out in space. Let's put solar power generating factories out in space. Like, what comes next is exciting and revolutionary, and we haven't seen the implications of it yet. And so I feel pretty confident that within the next 100 years, we should see a pretty vibrant community of human beings living in places that aren't just Earth.
If we don't blow ourselves up.
If we don't blow ourselves up first.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I wanted to ask about helium-3 and all that in the moon, but I think I misjudged the time. I believe that we're just right at the end right now. I know we started a little bit late, but I think that's about right timing. So, Fraser, I want to thank you so much for being generous enough to come on the show. I really do appreciate it. And I want to give a good plug to you. First of all, if you go to YouTube, type in just his name, Fraser Cain. That's Faraser, capital Cain. I think I spelled it right. And
Frasercain, yeah.
And also Astronomy Cast. Check that podcast out. Anything else you'd like to plug?
Well, just today we just got our new book has come out. Or I've gotten an advanced copy of it.
All right.
Which is the Universe Today Ultimate Guide to Viewing the Cosmos, which was written by David Dickinson, who is the amateur astronomy writer of Universe Today, and the book is going to be coming out in about 2 weeks. So if you're looking to get into amateur astronomy, definitely check out the new book. It's really exciting. We've got more than 100 photographs in it, which nobody has ever seen before. Or very few people have seen. It's all. I tried to get as many amateur astrophotographers involved in the book, so it's not the same old pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope that you've all seen. It's a whole bunch of work by people with telescopes and gear that the regular person can get. So I'm pretty excited about it, and available in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. All right. Make sure
Pre-order now.
All right. Pre-order now on Amazon. All right.
Yeah.
And make sure you give my best to Pamela. I always enjoy her a lot. Anyway, thanks so much. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. You take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, everyone. So that is it. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the show. And it's always interesting to understand and listen to what people think about the UFO topic on the outside. So I was glad to be able to do that. Next week we have Paul Stark. He was the director, I think, and producer of Vatican UFOs. He will be on next week's show. Thanks so much if you support the show. And I think that's about it for me. I want to thank everyone that does help out with the show. And Alejandro Rojas, our guest, and most importantly, our listeners. Thank you so much. And we'll be back next week. Keep your eyes to the sky.